Hi, I'm Al Miner, and welcome. I'm the founding director and chief curator of the Georgetown University Art Galleries. Today, I'm standing in our Maria and Alberto de la Cruz Gallery of Art on Georgetown University's main campus. Our campus stands on the grounds of the Nacogdoches and their descendants and the Piscataway Pinoy people. Like many universities across the country, Georgetown is currently closed as we work hard to protect the health and safety of our community at this unprecedented moment, the global pandemic of COVID-19. The entire world has made shifts and adjustments to this unusual crisis moment. But how has the art world specifically changed and adjusted? Tonight, 4 esteemed Georgetown University alumni will speak from different corners of the art world with their observations, insights, and predictions for the long-term impact of this pandemic on their sectors. Happy to introduce them to you now. Isabel Ernst is the founder of Ernst Real Estate Development and an avid collector of contemporary art here in Washington, D.C. She's also heavily involved in the museum her parents co-founded in Miami, the De La Cruz Collection. Steele speaks from the gallerist world. He is a dealer and former partner at Hauser and Wirth and White Cube Galleries, and recently co-founded a new private dealership in Los Angeles. Helaine Posner speaks from the point of view of a museum curator, as Curator Emerita of the Neuberger Museum of Art at SUNY Purchase and former curator of the MIT List Visual Arts Center. Our final panelist is Jennifer Wright, a vice president in the chairman's office of Christie's Auction House, New York. She was previously the head of the Old Master Drawings Department. After the conversation, I welcome you, our audience, to ask questions of our panelists using the chat feature in Zoom. I'm excited for tonight and hope you are too. I look forward to seeing you in the future online and soon, I hope, back here on our campus.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, panelists. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'm going to dive right in with our first question. I think we all know how unexpected the hit of COVID-19 felt, as if no one professionally or personally was prepared for what happened. The world seemed to change overnight. But I want to hear from some of you about how you think your sector adjusted so quickly. Were you ready? What things had you already put in place that might have made you well positioned to deal with this surprise? And in what other ways were you really caught off guard and had to catch up? Graham, I'd love you to start us off with the commercial world and the gallerist's approach to this. What was happening when COVID-19 hit, and do you feel like you were ready to adjust quickly?
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and happy to ask that question. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few weeks, months, since basically March 21st. I think the short answer is no. I think that there's no way that we were prepared for the radical kind of rupture that happened with COVID. I think that at the end of the day, to sort of mediate that response a little bit, there was significant investment, and this is speaking as my position at partner at Hauser and Wirth, which I subsequently left during all of this craziness. So that's potentially another conversation for another time. But in a way, the manner in which we had to change was strictly financial to begin with. Of course, you know, we have around, or we had, I'm still in the we moment, but Hauser and Wirth represents around 80 artists and estates. And there were financial commitments to each of those. There were shows that were happening. There was expectations, of course. I think we can sort of talk about this further, but the difference between, you know, a commercial gallery and an institution that relies on a different source of funding, a different timeline altogether, is that we were able to pivot very quickly. But what I would say is that there was no point at which we were expecting to have no visitors, close down all of the galleries. The reactions therein were not just with our commercial spaces, which we have across the globe, from, you know, Los Angeles, where I was the partner, through to Hong Kong, and every time zone essentially we had major shutdowns. I think when you're looking at this global organization, I think as well, you know, if you're looking at the auction houses, everyone all of a sudden has to shut down offices, and that's one thing. Certainly the act of shutting down a museum is very similar to a gallery, just at scale. What we then had to do was say, okay, we run through the sale of art. So how do we facilitate the sales of art in a time when no one can go and look at the artwork. The average price of a work at Hauser and Wirth is quite high, but what's wonderful about having a huge stable of artists is that there are all these different access points. Artists make additions from 5,000 to, the most expensive works of art we're selling are in the tens of millions. So at all of these different levels, the question was, how do we continue to generate sales for our artists? And invariably the obvious response was go online. And so Hauser and Wirth was and I can only speak from the example of this one specific organization, which of course is one of the largest in the world. There was a huge amount of investment that needed to be made immediately in online technology. But the questions very much were, what is the best? If you're trying to sell a $35 million Picasso, you're going to do that differently than a fantastic new body of work by Glenn Ligon, who wants to, which is fantastic, Isabel has one behind her, to be able to see and create a dialogue that was consistent with the artist's desires and intentions. How do you create an online exhibition? Initially there was, this was something that the partners had discussed in December at our partner meeting. Were we interested in AR? Were we interested in VR? Do we want to just do online viewing rooms where you see the same bench every single time and it just inserts the painting or sculpture behind? How do you work with film and video? How do you support the artists? And these were the questions that we had to do. But because we were a commercial gallery, it was always mediated through, okay, how do we continue to make sales? How do we continue to support our artists in these ways, even when they're not able to make sales? So there were ways that we were thinking, for example, with artists who were not as commercial, how do we take this opportunity and bring focus to one body of work that the general public might not have seen? How do we bring one specific object to the market or to people's understanding, to sort of hit people's consciousness? The idea of the zeitgeist. How do we hit that when it's literally a moving target between the elections, between Corona? I was saying earlier, I live in Los Angeles and there are fires. I'm currently with my in-laws in Brazil and there's a whole host of other issues here. These are the kind of things that we had to do. So no, we were certainly not prepared, but we were able to pivot through our own necessity and through the sort of fuel of the engine, so to speak, which was obviously in a commercial gallery, is sales, but the underlying point of what our sort of modus operandi was how do we support the artists? How do we do that? And how do we shift focus? Was that a good start for this conversation?
Definitely. So just as galleries, and I love the artist focus there, serve their artists first and foremost. Helaine, museums exist to help artists get their work to the public more than perhaps any other institutions. Do you feel that the museum world was well poised, as well as the commercial art world, or as well as anything, to move to this digital workplace and to this sort of digital communication style? Now, museums have traditionally been criticized for being behind the eight ball in terms of, using social media well, website development. That's sort of the most recent wave of museum development. How do you feel, both at your institution and at peer institutions, the museum world adapted to this overnight change?
I have to agree with what Graham said. No, we were not prepared, not well positioned to pivot. And I like the word pivot. As Graham said, in the commercial world, they're interested in sales and they have the funds to make these changes. Museums don't necessarily, and especially university museums. Funds are more modest, and we have to take that into account. We, at the Neuberger Museum, we had just opened two big exhibitions for us, two wonderful exhibitions on the work of Isaac Julian, the great British video installation artist, a wonderful immersive installation, and then another show on an Italian filmmaker, Pierpaolo Pasolini, and his influence in the Americas. And those opened at the end of January, and a month later they shut. And so we were faced with, like everyone else, the uncertainty. What do you do next? Do you close everything? Do you push everything forward? Where do you go from here? And I think there was a lot of scrambling at first. You make a decision and then you make another one and another one because the situation keeps changing. I mean, our primary function is, the in-person experience, the direct experience of a work of art, bringing people into the gallery, educating them, primarily students, faculty, staff, and then the larger public. So we could no longer do that, and the museum closed and is still closed. In terms of online, I don't think we were particularly strong there. Obviously, it's the way most museums communicate with visitors. I don't think any visitor comes to a museum without first going online and checking it out and seeing what's going on. And then we had some online events and activities, and we stepped those up over the last few months. And we've been pretty good, events for adults, for kids, that sort of thing. But it doesn't replace the experience of coming to the museum and seeing art. For the future, I found what many museums are doing are now relying on their own collections because they're concerned about making commitments to we have a big, as Al said, and Graham said, we have an enormous commitment to the artist. Our museum particularly shows contemporary art. You don't want to be making promises to artists that you can't fulfill. And that's the worst thing you can do. So consequently, we're relying on collections exhibitions, which are fine because you can change easily with something like that, and are not making real commitments until probably 21, 22. And so I think we all have to admit there's enormous disappointment that comes with all of this. We had so many activities and ideas planned that now have to be changed because of this situation. And we ourselves have to be more flexible about how we go about it. But I mean, I'd like at some point for Graham to talk about how he feels the online viewing rooms are going and how people are responding to that. Museums are not doing it quite as much. They're doing more educational events and activities. I think, and Jennifer can speak to that too. But yeah, I just wonder, do people like the online viewing or do they feel zoomed out?
So that's a great segue to actually talking to you and looking at the next question.
Okay.
So we all had to pivot. We did it. It wasn't easy, but we made the adjustment. It's 7 months later. Were those adjustments successful, and how have you adapted your strategy from that first wave of adjustment and first wave of new approaches to what you're doing now 6, 7 months in? And knowing that, unlike when this began, there isn't a clear end. I think we all remember that first lockdown that was going to be 2 weeks long in New York and in Washington and other cities. Clearly, we don't have a solid end date to this anymore, at least from the auction world. What have you guys learned in the last 7 months, and how have you changed that strategy to gain more success?
Thank you, Al, and thank you again for convening all of our fellow directors, council members for this conversation. It's great that we can be together even in this virtual space, if not actually physically. So for the sake of this conversation, I just want to establish a very basic definition of what an auction house is. An auction house is the middleman. We are not the buyer, we're not the seller, we don't own any art, we don't represent any living artist. We are the middleman. So what we had to do was keep our sellers happy, provide them with the platform still to sell, and find these buyers and bring them in to sell. Anything added onto that concept is essentially bells and whistles and something else grafted onto this very basic economic transactional structure. So, of course, what we had been doing is we've been having pre-sale exhibitions all over the world, having live auctions, having catalogs printed with illustrations, but that were also available online. So with the pandemic, we lost several very important components. First of all, we could no longer have those pre-sale exhibitions. We couldn't get clients into the room to look at their art. We couldn't get catalogs actually to where our clients were. Many of our clients have multiple homes. We didn't know where they were. It seemed pointless to mail these things. And we had already at the beginning of the year decided for environmental reasons to cut down the production of our catalogs by 50%. But I think anyone who has been a client or an employee of an auction house will fully admit we're not the first in line when it comes to technological innovations. So this COVID episode has really sort of drop kicked us into the future. In some cases kicking and screaming, but we've done it. As for the auction room itself, it no longer was this sort of almost Politburo size room of hundreds of people in an evening sale for 20th century art, convening, bidding in person or bidding in the phone, but looking around and seeing what all their colleagues and fellow collectors were doing. So we had to provide a way to make the clients, both the buyers and the sellers, feel like they were in the room and they knew what was going on. So what we did was we actually hired a production crew for our sales to help film them so people could see the colleagues who were in the room on the phone with collectors, which was the only way that they could bid. We've had no clients in the sale room except for the last couple of weeks in Paris and London, but it sounds like in Paris that's sort of stopped. So we went from sort of tiptoeing into a digital first world to being a digital first world. And so for those clients who needed the confidence of information about a work of art to bid on it, we did things like Zoom rooms and sort of virtual galleries, augmented reality. And now there's this really fun component on our website now where any work of art you can take a picture of and look at it in your room, whether it's your dorm room or your McMansion somewhere around the world. And that's a lot of fun. But also it's also really just basic expertise and client relationships, which are at the heart of our success as a business. For example, I had a client in the United States who wanted to buy a painting in London. They couldn't see it. So we took 1 million pictures, 1 million videos, we took it in different light, and we even had our art handlers bring it outside so we could take a video for the client to see in natural light. Our condition reports are even more thorough. We make sure we're on the phone with our clients or get our clients on the phone to speak to experts. And we also make sure that our sellers know that this is what we're doing, and that while there are definitely inarguably some elements that are missing to our process, like the in-person exhibitions, we are doing everything we can to still provide a service and to our clients so they have confidence to buy and sell with us.
Isabel, as a collector, you interact with all of these sectors. You're visiting museums to learn about artists, to research artists. You're working with dealers that you trust to acquire work for yourself and your family for the museum. 7 months into it, are you actively collecting? And is the way this has changed from the buyer's point of view, is it successful? Do you feel like you're able to learn about art and artists and acquire works with confidence in a way that still works for you, even though you can't go see the artwork in person?
So we have continued buying, and we went to Frieze LA, which was kind of the last, right on, and it was President's Day in February, and it was all starting to brew at the time. But we were really happy to be able to go there, and we were able to buy works of art, and we have continued working with Christina Pearls, with Sterling Ruby. We had a Mark Rojan piece that we bought. So we have been, the thing is with a collector, I mean, and Graham knows it, you have a relationship with a gallery. So, when you're very close to a gallery, you continue that relationship. So we really have continued very much, and they have been reaching out to us, obviously, during this pandemic, because since, all the art fairs got canceled after Frieze. So, as soon as, Art Basel got canceled, and, and now you've seen that even Art Basel, Frieze got canceled in London, and Art Basel Miami has been canceled. So obviously the galleries are reaching out personally to their, to the collectors to offer them works. So we have been, we had to immediately shut the museum after, Miami, because the government said, was comply with them with the procedures that they set up in Miami. And we have opened up again. So it's been really great that we opened up about a month ago. And with all the procedures of, signing a form when you walk in, you get your temperature taken. We have a limit of the amount of people, which we've never had in our museum. We've always let people, come in, but now we have a 30-person limit. You can't touch anything. We took away all the paper that we usually put in in every floor that you can pick up the pamphlets. So now it's all done digitally. And so we've been really careful in the office with the plexiglass, with the mask, with the 6 feet apart. What everybody knows, it's the procedures. So we have, but it's been great to see people come back in. And when you see the relief of having people, I mean, one of the things we was talking, Al and I was like, for my parents, my mom feels really, really that it's important to see the work of art. And that's why she started like 2 programs that she does. One is the New World School that she sends to Europe in the summer, the graduating class. And the other one is the Dash that she sends to New York. These are high school students to go into all the top museums in New York. Because she says you can't really like learn about art only from your screen or from a book. And so now what it is we're back to the screen and the book, because nobody, the museums are closed, you can't travel. So it's really gone back to, that only having an interaction with the work of art. But we feel it's very important to see the actual work. So we see the people coming into our museum with a smile on their face and just, being so, connected with the work. It's just been great to see them. So, for us financially, it's not a problem because we don't charge. Our museum is a free museum. So our income hasn't changed in that capacity. So we still have, our full staff, and they've been great. They worked through the pandemic. Everybody was still very much involved, working online and keeping up with, with the museum. And when we open with, a new installation, and now we're looking forward to even Art Basel. There is going to be a Design Miami. So I don't know if you know, it's going to be in the Moore space in the design district. So we're looking forward to having people there, just as long as, everybody, safety is number one for us, but really sharing the collection. So, but I see that, like art fairs, I think are probably one of the people in the art world that have suffered, and there's really no one representing the art world. But I was in another panel and I had a long conversation with, representatives from Art Basel, and obviously, the Christie, Sotheby's, Phillips, the auction houses can continue doing auctions virtually, but once, you cancel an art fair, that's, you don't get any income, and that's what they live off. So that's, and it's very hard. They've tried the virtual art fairs, but they still don't get money from the virtual art fairs. So I think that's one of those things that are going to, see what happens with the auction, with the art fairs. But
there was just the announcement, I think this week, that Frieze New York, so one of New York's biggest art fairs, will take place next May in a smaller version in the new venue that's indoor outdoor. And I'm going to say, like, I'm going to be the first person online, because not only do I miss seeing art in person and seeing new art in person and the excitement of that, I miss our community. I miss seeing you in person. We may not be kissing cheeks or hugging like we normally would, but the buzz of being with other people who love art and being with artists in a space is really special. And I think we're all missing that almost, I would even call it like an affectionate quality to the art world. So hopefully that's going to come back someday. I want to hear you all talk a little bit about what you think this is going to be like in 5 years or in 10 years, because I think we probably all agree that we're never going to go back to what it was like before this. The world in every capacity, professionally and personally, will change. Helaine, you were talking early on about how this walloped museums in a big way and everyone closed and they shuttered. What are museums going to be like in 5 years in the post-COVID world when they are open, but will they be the same? Will they ever be the same?
There's obviously the concern in the nonprofit sector about finances, and that museums might be smaller than they once were in terms of staff, fewer staff, less income coming in, cutbacks in programs. I think we'll certainly see that initially, that people will be much more conservative because people are much more concerned about the sources of funding. We've seen attendance now is, of the museums that are open, are only at 25%, so that's a tremendous blow. And that, I think, will come back gradually. The viewing experience, as sad as it is for there to be so few people, in some ways it's been enhanced because you can actually see works of art without jostling crowds. So hopefully it will reach some balance and some equilibrium. In thinking about this subject, I think it's important to bring up the issue of diversity. Which has been so front and center lately. I think the more progressive institutions have been thinking about this for a while. And, you know, my own museum has been particularly good in terms of showing women artists, artists of color, and so forth. I think the larger museums have been more conservative, but that now they're much more focused on that and issues related to that. But it's not just about representation of artists. There are systemic issues that need to be dealt with now, and I think are being dealt with. What is the composition of the staff? What is the composition of the board? How do we diversify? How do we bring more people into this discussion so that the museums reflect our society as a whole in a more inclusive and thoughtful and richer way? That's my hope, that some good will come out of this, and that we'll see museums that are more, that show more of what our society is about and be more sensitive to that.
Actually, let me throw it back to Graham then. So galleries will change too, but we also hope that, like museums, galleries will open their doors in a more traditional sense again. Do you think you're going to be functioning radically differently in 5 years? Is the percentage of online versus in-person interaction going to go back to what it was like before COVID? Is that going to skew in a new direction? And certainly you can, of course, address what Helaine was just talking about, is the change in representation and inclusivity in galleries, which I think was already starting to occur, and certainly in organizations you were involved with. But what does the gallery world look like in 5 years?
I mean, first, sort of taking that last question, I mean, I 100% hope that the level of diversity that we are championing now, or is being championed now, it's something that, you know, as you said, I worked at organizations where, you know, there was at least 50% women artists and a significant portions of artists of color. These can always be continued. I think the staff itself is hugely problematic in terms of the fact that white, you know, everyone working there. And it's also a systemic issue in terms of access, in terms of how you get people into the pipeline, you know, getting people interested in registrarial work as much as sales, as much as artist liaison, all of these kind of things I think will invariably change, because I think there's hopefully no way back at this stage. On the other side, I always kind of describe myself as like a Jewish grandmother. So at the end of the day, I love seeing art in person. And for me, one of the things that was very painful over the past 6 months was trying to plan these online organizational structures in terms of the Hauser and Wirth, I think very successfully went with VR. But it was also something that, you know, we had made one gallery, which was going to be our future gallery in Mallorca. And it was a situation in which after you see that one space 3 times in VR, it's boring. And the turnover rate of the online exhibitions, I think, is difficult. People do get tired. People don't want to look all the time and click into these things. You know, as Isabel was talking about, you know, as a collector myself, going through all of these art fair sites where you click and then you have to go back and then you click in, and it's the same, you know, with Basel, it was like the same bench to give scale. It's like this idea of, oh, people can enter in because there's a piece of furniture. All of this will have to be rethought and will continually be rethought, I think. And so that there will be amazing new advances. And I think the art world in general is an antiquated way of doing things. When Jennifer was talking about this is what I deal with. It's like, okay, great. Well, someone needs to see the painting. So you bring it outside or you do a video. You know, I think it is to the next generation, hopefully of Georgetown graduates, to really think about the ways in which this moment, from which we will all have PTSD to some degree, how will that affect the next few years? And I think systemically, we will hopefully be changing in a really interesting and dynamic way on all sides.
I want to go ahead and throw it to some audience questions, and I've already gotten a few from our students as well as other visitors, so let's throw them out there. One that I'm really interested in, and Isabel, actually, maybe you can start with this because you have such wonderfully close friendships with artists, is what do artists that you have all worked with think about this? Have you had any issues with an artist saying, yeah, you can see an image of my new work on my gallery's website, but I really don't want you to, because that doesn't represent it? Or Graham, have you had, or Jennifer, have you had situations where, really everybody, where an artist was resistant to the digitalization of this whole era, where they felt like they didn't want to participate in this? They're complaining about it. How have you seen it from your side of the conversations with artists, have you seen artists be resistant to this more virtual or online art world?
I think it's a new reality, so you have to jump on the bandwagon, and I think that you can't resist. If you don't want to get online, you're going to have really limited sales. So I don't think they're resisting that much. I think people are realizing. But as Graham said, I think that eventually we really want to go back to seeing the actual work, because nothing like standing in front of the actual work. And even if you take the work outside, Jennifer's saying, and try to 360 film this work of art, you're never going to get the same as seeing the actual work in front. So I really hope that we get to, once we get the vaccine, once things are under control, to get back to the people, back into the galleries and back into the museums. So
another question that came in, although Graham, do you want to address if artists have any of your artists in your stock been resistant to this sort of digital?
They certainly were at the beginning. And I think that there was also, some of the estates, were resistant. Also, how is this going to be affected? I think there was also the idea of like, well, the lockdown is going to end at some point soon, and you have to explain to a board of trustees, even if it does, this is a radically changed environment. So those conversations have had. I would say that as a collector of young artists as well as more established artists, I think some of the younger artists that I've spoken to were not resistant at all. They kind of got it immediately and said, okay, great. Well, I'm going to do my lockdown drawings and let's put those online. And so I think it's more of, it is a generational thing.
Another question came in from the general audience. Maybe Jennifer, you can start us off with this one, but it applies to so many of us. It's about what happens when we physically reopen. We're all talking about how we crave these physical experiences and we want our institutions to reopen. How do you assure the safety of visitors from the people who don't believe in wearing masks? So we know that our cities have all had different regulations. We're all reporting tonight from different locations around the world. Have you thought at all, Jennifer, about going back to the auction floor and what that might look like or be like? And if you anticipate, especially in a time of, for right now, political division, the physical experience being like, will Christie's have policies that maybe become permanent about how one dresses, behaves, wears a mask on the auction house floor?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll start by riffing off an apocryphal quote from Michael Jordan, who said, even Republicans buy sneakers. So we are non-denominational in our client base. And I have been back to the office multiple times since June. From mid-March until the end of June, I did not go back at all. But we moved our traditional 20th century sale from early May until the end of June. And that's a huge money-making event for us, and it was all hands on deck. So like I said earlier, for those major sales, we had no clients in the sale room. And I should say for most other sales, we had online auctions, which were all done online, no physical auction room. So for this, they completely revamped the sale room. So again, when there'd be hundreds of people or dozens of people sitting cheek by jowl, the phone banks, filled with colleagues jostling for a space on a phone, that was reduced to a certain number of client-facing people who would be on the phone with clients bidding in the auction, and the auctioneer on the rostrum. And that was all done socially distant. We also had an exhibition which was by appointment only. And so for this first major 20th century sale exhibition at the end of June, we actually also took highlights from that sale out to a museum in Southampton, because so many of our clients were out in the East End of Long Island, and they decamped from New York. And we actually had more clients come in to see the exhibition in Southampton than they did to our New York exhibition, which was open for twice as long. So we've continued with that throughout the summer and now the fall. So for example, we had another 20th century or major sale on October 6th. And what they did for us, for everyone who was in the room, which was again, only employees, including the auctioneer, is they gave us rapid COVID tests that morning. And for that, I was very grateful. So we could all be in the room, still socially distanced, but take our masks off. Really because we're on the phone with clients and they need to hear us clearly. You know, the auctioneer needs to understand us clearly whether we're bidding or not. And that was a great help. But one thing we didn't do is we didn't make that announcement. Now our exhibition, or our auctions are live on our YouTube channel and on our website. And we actually had almost 300,000 people watch that auction, which is incredible because I would have thought it was just consigners and buyers and my mother, but it wasn't. It was a couple 100,000 people. But we did get some comments about us not wearing masks. And I think it would have been prudent, but it never occurred to us to announce that early at the beginning of the sale. The reason everyone is not wearing a mask is because they had rapid COVID tests today and tested negative. So what we've been doing throughout the summer and fall, and I think what will continue for the rest of the year, are these by appointment viewings, a socially distant sale room where colleagues can telephone bid with our clients safely and for the most part wearing masks. And we will just try and make that work for as long as possible.
A few questions that have come in from alumni who I now realize I should introduce to each other since clearly they have some common interests. And they relate to each other. One is asking if you've seen evidence of artists who traditionally worked in non-digital media or traditional media, now thinking about translating to digital interfaces and making different kinds of work or how their work might deal with a digital interface. And the other one is about selling non-traditional media. And how is it different to put out into the market work like photography, video, compared to the translation of painting and sculpture? Does anyone want to tackle? Helaine, you have done a lot of work with video art in your curatorial career. What do you think about a shift in sort of the way artists are producing work and what kind of art looks best in these online formats? How does video or innately digital media translate? How does photography translate? I think that one's particularly complicated.
Well, in my view, something is always lost. It's a very different, there's, you know, when you talk about photographers and video artists, they're not, it's not monolithic. The work is very varied. With a still, you can probably do pretty well getting it on screen. With video, I'll go back to Isaac Julian again, because that's most present in my mind. We showed a piece called Western Union Small Boats, which is a 3-screen video. I watched it on my computer screen 20 times. That was not the experience of being in a room surrounded by enormous screens, a wonderful sound system, a darkened space, a piece that's immersive. Now, not every artist works on that level with production values that are so enormously high, but when they are, you still lose something. There's still something about the in-person experience. In terms of sales, I think that there are other people on this panel who are much better poised to answer those questions. And artists are, you know, an artist by their nature are creative people. They will adapt to the times, but I still think the in-person experience, I'm more likely to be a Jewish grandmother than Graham, but I like the in-person experience very much. And I think it is, maybe it's old-fashioned, but it is part of what art is about. You know, you think of what is it like to go to a concert rather than listen to a recording? What is it like to see a work of art rather than see it online? It's very, very different. And I think without the in-person, something will always be lost.
So Graham, I'm going to pivot to you with a specific example. So we're hearing questions about how traditional media might survive or be well suited for digital communication. So you work with Larry Bell, a sculptor who works in large scale with glass. So the physical experience is so important because of how big the piece is, how you see your reflection. There's a very almost ethereal or mysterious or mystic quality to that art. How do you get a piece like a large scale sculpture made out of colored glass by Larry Bell to a digital audience? And does it translate well?
It's an interesting question. And I think I would respond with 2 ways. One, on my Jewish grandmother on techophobe side, one of the things that I've worked very hard to do is make sure that these are placed in institutions that are outside, so that, you know, a lot of these institutions sculpture parks are open. And so that's very important to me, where I can go, okay, if it's a client, whatever, you can say, great, fly to Austin, Texas, or they're outside in Mocha, or they're in the south of France. For those people who are not billionaires with their own private planes, it's more complicated. And it's something that's as important to Larry's legacy and to what he wants to do, which is for people to be able to interact with these pieces. So it's something very complicated. And it's something that I've talked to him, even as an 82-year-old, about the idea of AR and VR. So it's something that because he works in geometric patterns, and because this is also something for especially for the VR tech geeks, they love the idea of trying to play with transparency and working between a translation between a video an AR experience, and trying to understand what it feels like when you have 4 layers of glass, for example, that you're looking through. So in a way, it's been really fun to work with new companies who are interested in this and interested in that level of complexity. But I think anything that is so specific in that way, you were talking about photography earlier, I think is actually the easiest, because it's very, in a way, there's something immediate to our scrolling through these images, especially as you're doing that and you go, oh, I love that. But I think it's very difficult in general right now when people are bombarded with images. I have to say that I have seen that the photography market has massively suffered because of that, and because there isn't that texture. There's nothing in people's minds. Of course, it's always different in person, but in people's minds, when you're buying a young photographer, it's like, okay, well, you have to love that image and want to look at it, or be a photography collector. There's not the crossover as much anymore. People are loving painting at the moment. It's really difficult to show sculpture in a viewing room because you just have a flat image, unless you have a 3-dimensional view, and then it feels weird, like you're really quickly walking around a John Chamberlain sculpture. I mean, there's not been a great way thus far to think about even sculpture. I mean, sculpture is a difficult media. Before we even come to mixed media to video, I was at this amazing small foundation here called Pivot in Sao Paulo, and I saw this a show that they had by a queer video artist, and he shot this video in circular format, and it is installed as a circle. You can't inscribe that circle onto a video screen and have it work, even though it's a single channel installation, let alone what Helaine was talking about, when you have, an installation that is 32 channels and you're meant to walk around. It's just really complicated.
I think yes, I think also we haven't talked too much about installation and performance, which is a very important part of the contemporary art world. There's something very direct and experiential about that. And I've worked in a number of cases with artists like Tanya Bruguera, Leandro Ehrlich, other artists like that. And there's something about the one-to-one, the being in the same space with another person to experiencing the performance aspect that I don't think you can capture very well online.
You can pivot to, we've got a couple questions about sort of market success and sales during this time. One question is about, do you think the new formats are working well? Are sales good in this sort of digital marketplace? Graham, you just said that the photo market is suffering, which may be a surprise to some people. Another person is asking, how do you invite someone? How do you attract a buyer in a different way than you were working before? How do you sort of pull them in and get interest when they're really talking about buying and not viewing or experiencing? Jennifer, Isabel, do one of you want to sort of field that idea about how the sales world has changed and what seems to be rising to the occasion and what doesn't, and where we're seeing successes?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here. We have increased the number of online auctions we've had. We have 91 more than we have last year, and online auctions have been a great a channel for new clients who come to us. Fully a third of our new clients have come to us from online only buying. That tends to happen in the luxury market, but what we've seen since March is we've had an enormous increase in the number of already existing clients buy online for the first time, and double the number of new clients coming to us online. And all I can think of is if people are buying $10,000, handbags or coats from Net-a-Porter or something like that, then they're not maybe differentiating between that and another luxury good, which is maybe how they're looking at art. And, far be it for us to judge them for that criteria. Absolutely, though, the volume and number of transactions is down. And certainly in sort of the ultra high net worth area, things that are sort of 50 million and above, we haven't seen anything like that. But that I think has to do, and this is really one of the only ways where we're similar to the recession of sort of 2008 and 9. That really has a lot to do with sort of reluctance on the seller side. We haven't seen any distressed sellers even this far into it. And no one wants to be selling at the bottom of the market. But now we're 6-7 months into it, and we do have a track record in every area, and we have sold things well. And we have sold things at record level prices, and not just in the 20th century area. We had one of our best Asia weeks where we sell traditional Asian and contemporary art in September. We had a wonderful week of Classic Week just 2 weeks ago where we had record-breaking prices for old master paintings. So I think people have pivoted, and I think even though I'm from the dirty commercial world, I think we forget though that the primacy of these objects, and especially if you're a collector, you want them at any price. And any price may just mean instead of seeing it in person now, you have to rely on video or photography or other experts to go look at things for you firsthand. So I think there we've seen people break their resistance. But of course we do want people coming back through our doors, because that's the fun part, being with the art with other people who love art.
I would add that I think that for, what's interesting, Jennifer, what you say about the online, all these new buyers, I think the art world is a really intimidating world for some people that, are not familiar with the art world, and going into a gallery or, it's like really intimidating. So now they feel like they can go online and purchase a work, and it's, they have more access to that work than having that in-person, experience. So you might find that some people, prefer the online. And then I think for the real, the big art collectors, I think that they'll continue buying, the works. If we've been buying Glenn Ligon, we'll continue buying Glenn Ligon. We know his work, we love his work. So any new work that comes out of Glenn Ligon that we get, offered, we would love to buy. So that's just how we continue buying, even though we don't see it in person. We know, that we love, that artist's work. So I think that that's,
Well, I'm going to see if we have any Glenn Ligon works on consignment and give you a call.
Exactly. Let us know.
Look, just to add to that, I think that one of the things that has been a great equalizer is that a lot of the galleries are putting prices on their online exhibitions, even at the millions of dollars, which I think is great, because as Isabel said, it is this sort of high snobbery. People come in and feel intimidated, even, asking, there were the amount of people who came into our Mark Bradford show and said, oh, how much are these? And, it's something that, of course, a lot of the front desk staff usually had been taught to be like, if you have to ask, of course they're sold, but it's also something that people are interested. And it's something that, even if it's, someone who's a young artist and is just wondering who it is, or whatever personal background people are coming from, online, it's just there. And because there were so many responses, especially for shows that we knew would sell out within 10 seconds of them actually being posted, and that there were 30 people for each work, it still was nice for people to know, okay, great, well, this was $300,000 and it sold. So you don't get 85,000 emails about the same two works that everyone wants. And then it also gives people an idea, oh, okay, well, that Ronnie Horn photograph is only $80,000. I can afford that. That's great. Let me contact this guy. I never thought I could afford a Ronnie Horn, or whatever it is. And that actually has been a great equalizer, and I think has been helpful as a whole to see this sort of shift optically for people in terms of being able to access.
I agree.
I've got to say, students, as a professor of museum studies, one thing that students ask me year after year is how much did that cost? There's always a lot of questions about where museums get money to acquire work, how much artworks cost. And even I, who, acquired works from major museums over years, I've found a lot of surprises that I've been getting emails from all the galleries I've worked with over the years with, new shows, and the prices are there. And I'm surprised at how much more accessible certain artists' work is than even I knew. So it's exciting to see from an outsider's perspective that maybe there are multiple access points that people weren't aware of. And I think, Isabel, that is that sort of intimidation factor. Another question that came in from the outside: in the online world, are you developing new audiences, or are you only sort of adapting to your existing audiences with new platforms? Helaine, what do you think? Are museums going to grow new audiences because
Well, I think you and I have talked about this, Al, that more people show up for this online event. We have 80 participants tonight. If this event was to take place inside the Dela Cruz Gallery, what is the capacity? You would have 30 or 40 people, which is a very nice turnout for a university museum. But yeah, I think, just to pivot on what you've been discussing before, it's the accessibility issue. People can sit on their couch or at their desk and attend an event easily. Whereas, if anything, I'm not in Washington. I haven't been in quite some time. I've been interacting more with Georgetown over the last 7 months than I have normally when I could physically go and visit. So I think it does become more accessible, these events and activities. But I can't help but feel sad as we're talking that something is also lost. I was listening to Daniel Weiss, who is the director of the Met, give a talk about the reopening of the Met. And he said something that really touched me. He talked about the reduced audiences and how, as I mentioned before, you go with 25%, you have a nice viewing experience. But he, being the president of the Met, could walk through when it was absolutely empty, and how that was a bad experience for him. That there's something about the community and the shared experience and being in a space with other people that really matters. The ease of doing that, to go to a gallery, to go to a museum, to have that accessible is something very special, and it's shared. And I think we all look forward to getting back to that. As much as we might appreciate the greater accessibility online, there's something about the in-person that I think will always be a step better.
We're wrapping up almost to 8 o'clock. I'd love to hear a final closing thought from each of you. Isabel, you're the first person on my screen. What are some of your final thoughts about how COVID will impact the art world in the long term?
Okay, I think that there's going to be some good things that come out from this COVID world, and obviously, long term. Hopefully, I think everybody wants to go back to seeing the actual works, whether it's in a museum, a gallery, the art fairs. That when you walk around the buzz, as you said, there's the people there, and it's really exciting. At the auction houses to have the room full, and you see the people bidding. So we really want to go, but at the same time, I think when I went to see the Mona Lisa the last time, the La Gioconda in the Louvre, when I was in the room with La Gioconda and 700 people, all in their selfies, not looking at her, but looking at their phones. And I think now, maybe when they walk in, they're not going to look at their phones and do a selfie and look more at the work, because they'll really treasure that moment, having seen that, we don't, take it for granted of seeing the actual work. But no, this time you really want to see the work. So hopefully, we'll appreciate much more when we see the actual works, and spend more time. I feel like sometimes people go too fast in the museums. They don't really spend the time to look at the work. So we're hoping that we'll be able to go back, and the Dela Cruz is open. So if anybody's in Miami, please come visit us in Miami, the Dela Cruz collection, and I hope everybody will get over this and go back to some kind of normality.
Jennifer, what about you? What are your sort of closing thoughts or predictions for how COVID's changed our art world lives?
I think unlike previous downturns in the market that I've lived through in 2001 and 2008, so now I've dated myself, I do think there will be changes to come out of this, that there's no going back. A lot of that has to do with technology. But technology as an enhancement, I think we're all in agreement that nothing beats the primacy of being in front of a work of art and being together with other people who appreciate and want to celebrate and learn from art and acquire art. But I think many of these digital tools will take us into the future, whether those are online auctions, the reduction of paper catalogs for sustainability issues. And I think we'll have to sort of also rethink our travel as well, whether it's traveling as an individual for business or traveling exhibitions. This is the longest I haven't been on a plane in my adult life for the past 25 years. On one hand, it's very pleasant, but on the other hand, there is a movable feast quality to the art world, both the commercial and institutional art world that is really wonderful, and that I think we all really miss somehow. And I think while I know that there won't be a flip the switch moment where COVID will be eradicated and everything will be back to normal, I do sort of think there will be a frenzy of zipping here and there once it really is all clear, because we all miss it so much. We miss the circuit, we miss the actual objects, and we miss the dialogue that comes from it.
I would jump on a plane the first moment it's available and go to any biennial in any city on earth. I will see you all there at the vernissage of the whatever biennial. Helaine, what about you? What do you think the long-term impact is going to be for the museum world?
Well, I was just struck by something Jennifer just said, that well, except for Jennifer, we're all involved in the contemporary art world, and we follow the traditional museum models. And I think with exhibitions that won't change too much, but I was thinking of the issue of catalogs and publications, which have been a sort of a staple of museums and exhibitions for many, many years. And they're very traditional, they're thick, they have color images, they're expensive to produce, they're expensive to purchase. I think we need to get lighter on our feet when it comes to that. And I think the discussion of technology very much ties into that. And people's attention spans are shorter now. How do we educate people? How do we get the information to them in ways that are more supple? And I think that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot in terms of upcoming exhibitions, to work with artists, to work with them, to maybe create something more of an artist book, or something that would capture the installation, or something that would be a bit more lively or alive, and work collaboratively with them to create something that's outside of the traditional catalog model.
As I shed a tear for every one of us who's ever written a coffee table art book and has to emotionally move on. Graham, why don't you give us our closing thoughts for the evening? What are your predictions?
I mean, as someone who travels all the time, and I am someone who was I was in front of La Joconde a month ago, and it was amazing to see people really focusing on it, but also as maybe some sort of a metaphor, there are two insanely beautiful Veronese paintings in that room that are like 4 meters by 4 meters, and no one looks at them because they're just shoveled into here. I think that it gives us breathing room and it gives us space. And I think as someone who's traveled all the time, even when I'm here, I extended my time in Brazil because I wanted to see shows. And I think that having these personal relationships with artists, personal relationships with dealers, personal relationships with curators, that's something that I am so blessed to be able to do. But I think anyone coming in, this will allow an access. This will allow more local dialogues and more local connections between people who are excited to get in, support their local museums, the local university art museum, the local gallery, and meet the artists. I think that there will be something, whether it's an, socially distanced coffee outside a studio and looking in through a window, or going back into the Dela Cruz Foundation when you're able to come and be there. This is something that is to be embraced. And I think that hopefully that will stay.
Great closing thoughts and a great conversation. I want to thank all of you, Isabel, Jennifer, Helaine, Graham, and of course, our audience for being with us tonight. We have more virtual programming to come, sponsored by the Georgetown University Art Galleries, and we hope to see you there at all of our future endeavors. Thank you, everybody, and good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.